You expect me to spend the best years of my life pushing your wheelchair, Michael? Her words came seconds after Michael's quiet confession. He had just told her, sitting rigid in the new black wheelchair, that a gym accident had left him paralyzed from the waist down. The doctors had explained recovery was uncertain, perhaps months, perhaps longer. He had expected shock, maybe tears, maybe a promise of faithfulness. What he received instead was Juliet's cold glare and a voice sharp enough to cut stone. The words cut through the mansion's foyer like a knife, but Juliet didn't stop there. She paced across the marble tiles, her heels clicking like gunfire. You were supposed to be my future power, travel, red carpets. Instead, you expect me to waste away as your nurse? Don't be ridiculous. Michael Johnson, age 44, sat motionless in his wheelchair, hands resting lightly on the armrests. His chest rose and fell once, a measured breath, though his eyes betrayed the deep crack running through him. He had faced hostile investors, ruthless boardrooms, and courtroom battles, but nothing compared to the humiliation of being discarded by the woman he had chosen to marry. Juliet's voice sharpened, mocking now. What do you think people will say? That glamorous Juliet gave up her life to spoon-feed a cripple? I won't do it, Michael. I refuse. No. She seized a heavy glass ornament from the sideboard, an award Michael had been given years earlier for philanthropy, and with a sudden snap of fury, hurled it toward him. Michael! Maya Williams cried out from the hallway. She sprinted into the foyer, sliding across the polished marble. The ornament struck her shoulder before it could hit Michael. Glass shattered, and Maya stumbled, falling to her knees. A bright line of blood streaked across her forearm where a shard had cut her. Stay out of this. Juliet's face twisted with rage. She lunged forward, seized Maya by the hair, and yanked her upward. Maya gasped, the cry escaping her lips raw with pain. Please stop, Maya pleaded, her voice trembling but clear. It was my fault. I stepped in. Don't blame Mr. Johnson, please. He doesn't deserve this. If you feel for the character, give this video a like and comment where you are watching from. Maybe someone near you is watching too. Michael's breath caught. The sight of Maya, trembling yet shielding him with her own body, tore through the hollow space Juliet's cruelty had left behind. His hands clenched the arms of his chair, fury and sorrow colliding in his chest. In that suspended moment, memory washed over him. Hard times translate love, his father had told him only a week ago. They had been seated in the study, the old man's voice deep with conviction. Easy times mistranslate it. If you want to know whether Juliet truly loves you, son, don't look at her smiles in front of cameras. Test her when the lights go out. Let her show you what she is in the dark. Tonight, the dark had come and Juliet's mask had shattered. Michael's gaze shifted from Juliet's contorted face to Maya's. Despite her pain, despite blood glistening on her arm, and Juliet's grip pulling at her scalp, Maya's eyes held only one plea. Protect him. She was begging not for herself but for him. He remembered the small details of the past weeks, Maya rising before dawn to brew his lemon water, quietly adjusting the pillows behind his back, lifting Scout the service dog onto the bed when Michael's strength failed. She had never sought his praise, never asked for recognition. She moved through the house like quiet grace, anchoring his days without fanfare. That was love. Not the glossy promises Juliet had fed to cameras, not the designer dresses and photo ops. Love was this. A woman willing to bleed for him without hesitation. Juliet, Michael said finally, his voice like steel. Let her go. Juliet froze, breathing hard, still gripping Maya's hair. For a heartbeat it seemed she might tighten her hold. But then, with a hiss of disgust, she shoved Maya away. Maya stumbled, catching herself on the edge of the side table, wincing as her injured arm brushed against it. Scout growled low in his throat, pressing against Michael's legs protectively. Juliet snatched up her purse, eyes blazing. You're pathetic, she spat. Both of you. Keep your little servant. Maybe she'll be better company than I ever was. She stormed out, slamming the front door so hard the chandelier trembled. The silence afterward was deafening. Broken glass glittered on the marble like scattered stars, red wine spreading across the floor in slow rivers. Michael wheeled himself forward an inch, his breath steady but heavy. Maya, he said softly. She was still on her knees, clutching her bleeding arm, her chest heaving. She raised her eyes to him, dark, pained, yet steady. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to cause trouble. I couldn't let her hurt you." Michael stared at her. Every line of his father's warning, every doubt he had buried about Juliet, every quiet act of devotion Maya had offered in silence, they all collided in this moment. "You don't have to apologize," he said, his voice firm, resonant. "You've done more for me tonight than she ever did." Maya blinked, startled by the weight of his words. She pressed the hem of her sleeve against the cut on her arm, trying to staunch the bleeding, and lowered her gaze. Michael turned his chair slightly toward the wide bay window. Los Angeles sprawled beneath them, the city humming with neon and engines, laughter and loneliness. Inside the mansion, shards and stains testified to betrayal but also to loyalty, fierce and unspoken. He recalled again his father's voice. "Easy times mistranslate love, hard times reveal it." Tonight, Michael understood. Juliet's contempt had been translated. So had Maya's sacrifice. The chipped glass of water she had set out for him earlier still sat on the low table. He reached for it now, lifting it to his lips, letting the imperfect rim press against him. Broken, yet still holding. "Maya," he said quietly, not turning from the window. "You'll stay?" Despite the pain in her scalp and the sting of her wound, she straightened, nodded once. "I'll stay." And with those words, the mansion no longer felt empty. The next morning broke gray over Los Angeles, the sky heavy with marine layer that rolled in from the Pacific. Michael Johnson had not slept much. He had replayed Juliet's departure again and again in his mind, the words, the smash of glass, Maya's cry when her skin was cut. Each time, he found himself staring into the ceiling of his bedroom, listening to the faint whir of the chair's motor when he shifted positions, the sound of a life he had not expected. By 7, he was dressed in a dark suit, one chosen not for cameras but for dignity. Maya insisted on accompanying him to the hospital for his scheduled follow-up, her arm wrapped in a bandage from the previous night. He had protested that she needed rest, but she only shook her head. "You shouldn't face them alone," she said simply. There had been no argument after that. The drive down to Cedars-Sinai was quiet except for the murmur of the news on the radio. Reporters speculated about his accident, about whether the wedding would still happen, about the Johnson Foundation's next gala. The voices blurred together, empty conjecture that Michael let wash over him. His father's words were louder in his mind. Hard times translate love. Inside the hospital, the private wing was hushed, a place designed for discretion and wealth. White walls gleamed under recessed lights. Nurses moved briskly but with soft voices, and security stood at the ends of corridors like silent sentinels. Waiting in the consultation suite were 2 men, his personal attorney, Grant Davis, and his longtime physician, Dr. Harold Lane. His father, Mr. Johnson, was also present, seated with the composure of a man who had faced more battles than he could count. He rose when Michael wheeled in, embracing his son with a strong hand on his shoulder. "Michael," the elder Johnson said quietly, "you look steadier than I feared." Michael managed a faint smile. Steady on the outside. Maya lingered near the door, uncertain if she belonged in such a room of authority. She looked out of place among tailored suits and polished shoes, but her presence anchored him more than anyone else. Grant Davis cleared his throat, opening a thick folder of documents. "Mr. Johnson, we need to formalize the parameters of your situation. The press has already begun speculating about the permanence of your condition. To protect your holdings and the foundation, we must control the narrative carefully." Michael's eyes narrowed. "Control the narrative," he repeated. "You mean lie." Grant gave a cautious smile. "Spin, not lie. We state that your doctors are pursuing aggressive therapy, that outcomes are uncertain but optimistic. That way, you maintain investor confidence while keeping personal matters private." "Doctor," Lane leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. "Medically, you're not permanently paralyzed, but recovery will take time, and you asked me to keep this condition ambiguous." His voice softened. "Michael, you asked me to play along so you could test Juliet. I want to be clear professionally. I do not recommend pretending longer than necessary." Michael's father interjected. The test has already spoken. Juliet failed. But the world does not need to know the details yet. What matters is how you use the lesson. Michael rubbed his temple, exhaustion pulling at him. He remembered Juliet's words, her contempt, the object sailing across the room. Maya's body interposed like a shield. The contrast was too sharp to ignore. Grant tapped the folder. Sir, what's at stake here isn't only personal. If investors believe you are permanently incapacitated, they may attempt to maneuver control of the Johnson Group. There are board members who would seize any opportunity. We need a firm statement today. Michael looked at his father. And what do you think? The older man's face was carved with lines of experience, but his eyes were steady. I think truth eventually comes to light. But timing matters. Right now, you should let the world underestimate you. See who remains loyal, who sharpens their knives. In the meantime, decide where your own loyalty lies. Michael's gaze shifted to Maya, still quiet near the door. Her bandage peeked from under her sleeve. She caught his eyes for a moment, then looked down quickly, as if afraid she had overstepped by meeting them at all. He remembered her cry, her plea that Juliet not blame him, her willingness to bleed for his safety. He spoke finally, his voice firm. We'll say I'm under therapy. Nothing more. Nothing less. Uncertain outcome. I want NDAs for all staff. No leaks from this wing. No photographs beyond what we approve. I will continue appearing at board meetings remotely. And the foundation work continues unchanged. Grant nodded briskly, already scribbling notes. Yes, sir. Dr. Lane hesitated. Michael, be cautious. The body listens to the mind. If you convince the world you're broken, sometimes your body follows. Michael allowed a small, grim smile. Then I'll make sure the world sees only what I permit, but I won't let them dictate my spirit. His father leaned back, folding his hands. That's the son I know. The conversation shifted to practicalities, schedules for physical therapy, security details, the language for the official statement. Michael listened, but his mind drifted. He thought of Juliet's laughter at parties, her hand on his arm for photographs, her absence in his darkest night. He thought of Maya's soft words in the kitchen, her early morning care, the way she stayed after Juliet left, saying only, I'll stay. As the meeting drew to a close, Grant asked, Shall we issue the statement this afternoon? Michael nodded. Do it. Maya finally spoke, her voice cautious. Mr. Johnson, forgive me if it isn't my place. But are you sure? Once the statement is out, people will look at you differently. They'll judge. Michael turned his chair toward her. They already do. Let them. I would rather be judged for appearing weak than for betraying myself. She bowed her head slightly, chastened. But he saw gratitude flicker in her eyes. She was not used to being heard in rooms like this. His father rose, placing both hands on Michael's shoulders. Remember, son, Juliet revealed herself because of this test. But the real revelation isn't hers. It's yours. What you choose to build from here will define the rest of your life. On the ride home, the marine layer began to lift, sunlight pushing through over the hills. Michael watched the city roll past the coffee shops, the bus stops, the ordinary lives carrying on. His chest felt heavy, but not with despair. With clarity, Maya sat quietly beside him, clutching a small first aid kit she insisted on keeping close. The bandage on her arm had spotted red, but she did not complain. She gazed out the window, the wind brushing strands of hair across her cheek. Michael studied her reflection in the glass. He realized then that loyalty didn't announce itself in grand speeches. It revealed itself in quiet endurance, in wounds carried without protest. In the simple words, I'll stay. As the car climbed back toward the mansion, Michael resolved that the test his father had urged had done more than expose Juliet's false love. It had also uncovered the true heart of someone he had almost overlooked, and he was determined never to overlook her again. The mansion was quieter than it had ever been. Days after the hospital meeting, the grand rooms of Michael Johnson's Hollywood Hills estate carried a kind of hush that even the city's noise below couldn't breach. Juliet's perfume no longer lingered on the stairwell. Her laughter didn't echo through the halls. What remained was the steady rhythm of Maya Williams moving through the house, her footsteps soft, her hands always busy with something practical. Michael had noticed her before, of course, but only in passing. She had worked for Juliet's family for years and occasionally filled shifts at his estate when needed. To him, she had been efficient, respectful, invisible, in the way good staff often were. But since Juliet's violent exit, Maya had stepped into the light. He saw now the quiet gravity she carried, the devotion she poured into every task. Each morning began the same. At dawn, Maya brought him a glass of lemon water, always fresh, always chilled just enough to wake the senses. She helped him through the motions of preparing for the day, adjusting the rails in the bathroom, setting out clean clothes, arranging the medications in neat little rows. Her movements were precise but never hurried. She did not chatter. She did not complain. She worked with the steady patience of someone who believed every small act mattered. Michael observed her with an attentiveness that surprised him. He watched the way she tied her hair back before leaning over to lift a pillow, how she whispered to Scout, the service dog, as though he were a child, how she checked the wheelchair's brakes twice before letting him transfer from bed. These were details Juliet had never touched, never cared to understand. One morning, as she adjusted the sling that helped shift him into his chair, he broke the silence. "Maya, why do you always start with lemon water?" She glanced at him, a flicker of surprise in her dark eyes. "My grandmother used to say it cleans the night out of you. It helps you face the day with a clear spirit." Michael let the words settle. There was wisdom in them, old and unpretentious. He took a sip and felt, for the first time in days, the faint spark of comfort. Later that week, he insisted on being wheeled into the garden. The sun warmed his face, and for a moment he closed his eyes, listening to the wind rustle through the lemon trees. Maya knelt nearby, trimming dead leaves, humming under her breath. When he opened his eyes, he caught her watching him, her gaze quickly diverted when she realized. "You hum when you work," he remarked. She flushed slightly. "It helps me keep pace." "What tune?" "Just something my mother used to sing in church. A hymn, I suppose." "Zilly." He nodded, remembering the Sundays of his own childhood, his mother's voice rising in song. For years he had drowned out those memories with work, money, noise. Now, in the quiet, they returned. Evenings were more difficult. The pain in his legs flared, muscles stiffened, and he found himself restless, irritable. Juliet would have left him to the night staff, or pretended not to notice. Maya stayed. She sat with him during the therapy exercises, counting aloud as he struggled to lift his legs an inch from the chair's footrests. She offered encouragement, never pity. One night, when frustration boiled over, he slammed his fist against the armrest. "What's the point? Why pretend this will change?" Maya startled but didn't retreat. Instead, she crouched beside him, her voice steady. "Because pretending is the first step toward believing. And believing is the first step toward healing." Her words stung with their simplicity. He turned his face away, ashamed of his outburst, but she didn't leave. She only placed the lemon water on the table and said, "I'll see you in the morning, Mr. Johnson." As the days blended, Michael found himself looking for her presence even when she wasn't in the room. He listened for the sound of her footsteps, the gentle clink of dishes, the murmur of her voice as she spoke to Scout. She had become the pulse of the house, steady, reliable, impossible to ignore. One afternoon, he watched from his study window as she carried groceries up the long drive. The bags were heavy, her arm still wrapped from the cut Juliet had inflicted, yet she didn't complain. When Scout barked from the porch, she laughed softly, shifting the weight to scratch his head. Michael felt something stir in his chest, an unfamiliar blend of admiration and guilt. She deserved more than servitude, more than carrying someone else's burdens. Yet here she was, carrying his without hesitation. That evening, as she bandaged her arm again, he said quietly, "You shouldn't have had to protect me that night. It wasn't your place." She looked up, startled. "If it wasn't my place, then whose was it?" The question lingered. He had no answer. Maya tied off the bandage and stood. "You don't need to thank me, Mr. Johnson. Protecting people, it's the only thing I know how to do." Michael watched her leave the room, her silhouette framed in the doorway. He thought about the many people in his life who had claimed to love him, who had vowed loyalty, who had smiled for photographs and clinked glasses at galas. None of them had stepped between him and harm. None had bled for him. The mansion felt different now. It was still vast and echoing, but where it once had been a stage for Juliet's performances, it had become something else. A place where small acts of devotion wove themselves into a fabric stronger than any public vow. Lying awake that night, Michael replayed the sound of Maya's voice as she said, "If it wasn't my place, then whose was it?" He realized that the answer to that question might change the course of his life. In the silence, Scout shifted at the foot of his bed, letting out a low sigh. Michael reached down to scratch the dog's head, the action calming him. He remembered his father's words again, hard times translate love. Perhaps he had misjudged where love lived. It wasn't in champagne toasts or staged photographs. It was here, in the quiet of the night, in the care of a woman who hummed hymns under her breath and carried lemon water at dawn. Michael closed his eyes, not with despair this time, but with the faintest sense of peace. The fracture in his life remained, but he could feel the edges pressing together, held by something stronger than glass. By the end of the second week, the silence of the mansion could no longer shield Michael Johnson from the noise outside. Los Angeles was buzzing. News anchors speculated about his accident. Talk shows debated whether Juliet had abandoned him, and tabloids printed photographs of her in designer gowns, attending parties without him. To the public, the narrative was simple. The billionaire was broken, and the fiancée had moved on. But inside the house, where Maya's quiet routines continued to anchor his days, Michael knew the story was far more complicated. It began on a Monday morning with a call from the Johnson Group's board. Grant Davis, his attorney, connected the video conference on the wide screen in the study. 10 faces appeared in neat squares, polished and impatient. Behind them gleamed the modern glass walls of downtown offices. "Mr. Johnson," the chairman said, his tone brisk. "The markets are unsettled. Investors are concerned about your condition. We need clarity." Michael sat straighter in his chair, Scout at his side, Maya standing discreetly just outside the camera's view. "You have clarity," he replied. "I remain chairman and active in all operations. The foundation's initiatives continue. My condition is temporary." A woman from the board adjusted her glasses. "With respect, the public believes otherwise. Rumors of permanent disability are affecting confidence. Some are asking if you intend to step down." Michael's jaw tightened. "No one should mistake my injury for incapacity. My role stands." The meeting dragged for an hour, with veiled suggestions that he appoint interim leadership, that he make a stronger statement, that he prove his stability. When the screen finally went black, Michael exhaled hard. "They're circling," he muttered. From the doorway, Maya spoke softly. "Like vultures?" He looked up, startled by her candor. Then, unexpectedly, he chuckled. "Yes, exactly like vultures." That evening, the pressure continued. Juliet's social media posts flooded tabloids, pictures of her at a Malibu beach house, laughing with friends, a champagne flute raised high. The captions were artfully vague about freedom, about not being chained to anyone's misfortune. Commentators read between the lines with glee. Grant arrived late, carrying a folder of clippings. He dropped them on the table with a thud. "She's building a narrative. That you're pitiable. That she escaped before your decline ruined her life. The press loves it. If you don't respond, that's the story that sticks." Michael pinched the bridge of his nose. "I won't play her game." "You don't have to," Grant said smoothly. "But we need optics, photos, proof of strength. A gala appearance. Anything that shows you're still in control." "I just got out of therapy an hour ago," Michael snapped. "I can barely stand without braces. And you want me smiling for cameras?" Grant leaned closer, lowering his voice. "This is bigger than pride. The public face of strength holds your empire together. Without it, we risk hostile takeovers." Michael's father, who had joined them for dinner, spoke quietly. "Son, sometimes silence is strength, but other times, silence is surrender. Decide which this island." Maya, clearing dishes at the sideboard, froze for a moment, then continued her work. She didn't look at Michael, but he knew she was listening. Everyone was. Later that night, he wheeled himself into the terrace overlooking the city. Maya followed with a blanket draped over her arm. She laid it across his shoulders without a word. They stood there, the hum of Los Angeles rising like a tide, helicopters tracing lines of light through the sky. "Do you think I look weak?" Michael asked suddenly. Maya hesitated. "You look human. Is that enough?" She met his eyes, unflinching. "For people who love you, yes. For the rest, they'll always want a show." He considered that. Juliet had always given the world a show. Maybe that was why she fit the cameras better than she ever fit the quiet of his home. 2 days later, the board's fears materialized in headlines. Johnson Empire in jeopardy, wedding called off, billionaire in decline. Photographers staked out the mansion gates, their lenses like rifles waiting for a glimpse of him. Michael ordered the security team to push them back, but Maya couldn't ignore the frenzy when she went to the market. She returned with groceries and the weight of strangers' whispers. At the checkout, she'd heard 2 women muttering about Juliet's escape, one of them saying, "I'd never stick around either. Imagine wasting your life on a man in a chair." When she recounted it to Michael that evening, her voice carried more pain than she wanted him to hear. "They don't know you," she said. "They don't see you fight every day. They only see the chair." "No." He studied her face, the lines of exhaustion, the quiet fire in her eyes. "And what do you see?" She swallowed, lowering her gaze. "I see someone worth standing beside." The words struck him deeper than any headline. He wanted to ask her why, to demand what she truly felt. But the moment passed, as she turned to Scout and ruffled his ears. That weekend, Grant returned with a plan. "We'll host a private reception for the foundation. Limited press, controlled photos. We show you leading the board, speaking with donors. You don't need to stand, only to appear unbroken." Michael hesitated. The thought of cameras probing his every movement made his stomach tighten. But he also remembered his father's warning silence could become surrender. Perhaps he couldn't ignore optics any longer. He agreed reluctantly. On the night of the reception, the mansion gleamed. The terrace was strung with lights, catering staff moved swiftly, and the city's elite gathered with practiced smiles. Michael maneuvered through the crowd, Maya discreetly by his side. Scout at his heel. The guests offered handshakes, compliments, cautious glances at the chair. When Michael rose to speak, the hum of conversation hushed. He gripped the microphone, steady despite the braces beneath his trousers. "The Johnson Foundation has always been about resilience," he began, "about believing in recovery, even when the world doubts you. I intend to continue that mission not from the sidelines, but from the front." The applause came, polite but real. Cameras clicked. For a moment, Michael felt the power of optics, the illusion of control crafted for those who needed it. But when he glanced to the edge of the terrace, he saw Maya watching him, her expression unreadable. Not admiration, not pity, something steadier, truer. She knew the speech was performance. She also knew what no one else in that glittering crowd could see: the bruises from therapy, the sleepless nights, the quiet determination that came not from headlines but from survival. Later, as the guests drifted out and the lights dimmed, Michael sat with Maya in the kitchen, eating leftover sliders from the caterers. No tuxedos, no cameras, just the hum of the refrigerator and the faint sound of Scout snoring. "Did it work?" Maya asked. Michael chewed thoughtfully. "For them, yes. For me, I don't know." She tilted her head. "Maybe you don't need to prove anything to them." He looked at her, really looked. "Then who do I need to prove it to?" Maya didn't answer. She only pushed the plate closer to him, as though to remind him that not all battles were fought under spotlights. Some were fought here, in the quiet, with food shared at a kitchen counter. Michael leaned back, the taste of salt and onion lingering. Outside, the city pulsed with its endless hunger for spectacle. Inside, he realized, the truth was waiting, steady, as the woman across from him. The morning after the reception, sunlight spilled over the Hollywood Hills, cutting through the marine haze. Michael sat in his study, the wheelchair positioned near the wide windows. The city below glimmered, relentless in its movement, but inside he felt a weight heavier than the chair itself. The event had gone as Grant predicted. Applause, headlines, photographs of resilience. Yet when he woke, there was no satisfaction, only emptiness. Optics had worked for the world, but they hadn't worked for his heart. Maya entered quietly, carrying his lemon water. She set it on the desk without a word, then began straightening the papers Grant had left behind. She always moved with a kind of respectful invisibility. But Michael noticed her every detail, the small bandage she still wore beneath her sleeve, the way she hummed softly under her breath when she thought no one was listening. "Maya," he said suddenly. She looked up, startled. "Yes, sir?" "Sit with me a moment." She hesitated, then pulled a chair across from him. Scout shifted at her feet, content as if he belonged to her as much as to him. Michael studied hair. "Last night worked for the cameras, but it didn't work for me. I realized I was still pretending, still covering." "You weren't covering," she said softly. "You were leading. People needed to see you strong." "Strong," he repeated, almost bitterly. "Or staged." She didn't argue. Instead, she lowered her gaze, folding her hands in her lap. He saw a flush of honesty in her silence, and it cut him deeper than any polished praise from donors. Later that afternoon, Juliet called. Her voice, bright with false cheer, poured through the speaker. "Michael, darling, I've been thinking. Maybe I was too harsh. I might be willing to visit. Just to talk." Michael listened, jaw tightening. "Visit?" he repeated. "Yes, but not if you expect me to live there. I can't put my life on hold. You understand." His silence stretched. In that pause, he remembered the glass ornament hurled across the foyer. Maya's blood on the marble. Juliet's hand in her hair. He remembered Maya's voice begging Juliet not to blame him. The contrast was unbearable. "Juliet," he said finally, his voice even, "if you want to be part of my life, then you need to live that life with me. Here. Fully." The cheer in her tone cracked. "Michael, don't be unreasonable. I have commitments, campaigns, appearances. You can't ask me to give that up." "I can," he replied, his voice firm. "Because anything less isn't marriage. Move in, or don't bother calling again." "Loh." There was a sharp inhale, then a brittle laugh. "You've changed. This isn't the man I fell in love with." "No," he said quietly. "This is the man I've always been. You just didn't see it." The call ended with a click. Michael sat still, staring at the silent phone. Maya hovered at the doorway, her expression unreadable. "You heard," he said. She nodded once. "I didn't mean to. It doesn't matter." He exhaled. "She won't come. Not really. She never intended to." "Oh." Maya took a tentative step closer. "You gave her the chance. That's all anyone can do." He looked at her, really looked. "And yet you're here. You stay when you don't have to." Her cheeks flushed, but her voice was steady. "Because someone has to." That evening, his father visited. Mr. Johnson settled into the leather armchair by the fireplace, his presence filling the room with quiet authority. "I heard about Juliet," he said. Michael nodded. "She won't move in. She won't risk her life for mine." His father studied him carefully. "And what does that tell you?" "That the test is working," Michael admitted. Mr. Johnson leaned forward. "Exactly. But son, you must also recognize the other side of the test. Not only who fails, but who passes." Michael's gaze drifted toward Maya, who was in the kitchen preparing tea. He thought of the countless mornings she had risen before dawn, of the bandages she had wrapped, the insults she had endured to protect him. He thought of her words the night of the reception. "I see someone worth standing beside." When she returned with the tray, Mr. Johnson smiled at her. "You've been caring for my son with devotion. It doesn't go unnoticed." Maya's eyes widened, and she lowered them quickly. "I only do what's needed, sir." "No. Sometimes what's needed," the elder Johnson said gently, "is the greatest gift of all." That night, after his father left, Michael wheeled himself onto the terrace. Maya followed as she always did, a blanket folded over her arm. She draped it across his shoulders, her fingers brushing his sleeve. The contact was brief but electric. "Why do you do it, Maya?" he asked suddenly. She blinked. "Do what?" "Stay. Care. Bleed, even. You could walk away any time, and yet you don't." That. Her throat worked as she searched for words. "Because I couldn't live with myself if I didn't. Because leaving someone alone in their hardest hour. That isn't who I am." He studied her, his chest tight with emotions he couldn't yet name. In her answer, he heard no performance, no optics, only truth. The city lights glittered below, cameras flashing somewhere in the distance, Juliet's curated life still making headlines. But here, in the quiet of his terrace, Michael realized the question was no longer about whether Juliet would move in. The real question was whether he could allow himself to see what was already before him, the steadfast presence of a woman who had passed the test without even knowing she was taking it. As the night deepened, Scout curled at Maya's feet, the blanket warm across Michael's shoulders. For the first time in weeks, he felt something close to peace. Juliet's absence no longer felt like a loss. It felt like clarity. He turned his chair slightly toward Maya. "Thank you," he said simply. She tilted her head, confused. "For what?" "For staying." Maya's eyes softened, and she whispered, "Always." Michael looked back out over the city, his father's words echoing once more. Hard times translate love. And now, he thought, love had begun to translate itself in ways he had never imagined. The first true week without Juliet began with silence. Not the silence of anger, not the tense hush of an argument waiting to explode, but the clean silence that follows a storm. The mansion no longer smelled of her perfume or echoed with her clipped laughter. Instead, it carried the faint scent of lemon from the trees in the garden and the soft rhythm of Maya's careful movements as she began another morning. Michael Johnson sat in his chair near the breakfast nook, staring at the headlines spread across his tablet. Juliet had already given her version of events to a glossy magazine. She hadn't mentioned the fight, the glass, or Maya's injury. Instead, she played the role of a woman who had been forced to choose between freedom and captivity. "I had to protect my future," the headline read. The world sympathized, of course. It always did with her beauty and her talent for spinning tragedy into self-promotion. Michael's fingers tightened on the tablet until Scout nudged his knee with a wet nose. He lowered the screen and let out a long breath. Across the kitchen, Maya set down a plate of scrambled eggs and toast. She placed a glass of lemon water beside it, her bandaged arm still stiff, though she made no complaint. "Eat," she said simply. He looked at her. "You don't have to do all this." She raised one brow. "Do you want to argue on an empty stomach?" For the first time that morning, he smiled. It wasn't a wide smile, but it was real. He picked up the fork and ate slowly, listening to her hum as she moved about the kitchen. It struck him again how her presence filled the house in a way Juliet's never had. Juliet had taken up space. Maya gave it warmth. Later that day, his father visited. The elder Johnson arrived in his tailored gray suit, carrying the scent of old cologne and authority. He sat opposite Michael in the study, his hands folded over his cane. "Son," he said after a long pause, "you've come to the edge of the test." Juliet revealed her truth. "Now you must decide whether to step fully into this new life or retreat back to pretense." Michael rubbed his temples. "And if I retreat, you'll live half a life, half honest, half hidden. That isn't the man your mother raised." Michael turned toward the window. Outside, Maya was in the garden, coaxing Scout into a game of fetch with a tennis ball. The dog bounded across the grass, and she laughed, a sound so unguarded it cut through his doubts. "I'm afraid," he admitted quietly. His father's voice softened. "Of what?" "Losing Juliet. She's already gone. Afraid of being seen as weak? You were never more a man than the night you endured her cruelty without breaking. What else is there to fear?" Michael's gaze followed Maya as she bent to scoop up the ball, her bandage stark against her dark skin. He thought of her shielding him, bleeding for him. His voice was low but steady. "I'm afraid of what happens if I admit how much she matters." His father studied him. "Then perhaps that is the fear you need to cross." That evening, Michael called a household meeting with Grant and Dr. Lane present. Maya stood quietly at the edge of the room, assuming she wasn't meant to be part of it. But Michael gestured for her to stay. I've decided, he said firmly, for the next months, I will live as though this condition is permanent. No exceptions. The board will see me in the chair. The press will see me in the chair. The world will see me in the chair. If they try to exploit weakness, let them try. I won't stage recovery or hide behind optics. I'll meet this as I am. Grant frowned. Sir, that may damage confidence. Michael's jaw set. Confidence built on illusion is no confidence at all. Dr. Lane sighed but nodded. If this is your choice, then we'll structure the therapy accordingly, but you must prepare for the scrutiny. Michael looked at Maya. She didn't flinch from his gaze. Instead, she gave the slightest nod, as if to say, I'll stand with you. After the meeting, Maya walked him out to the terrace. The air smelled of jasmine and distant ocean. She adjusted the blanket across his lap, her fingers brushing his wrist. You're certain? She asked quietly. Yes, he replied. It's the only way forward. No more pretending. She hesitated, then said softly, pretending isn't always weakness. Sometimes it's protection. He turned to her. And what about truth? Her eyes held his. Truth is what you can live with when the lights are out. He let the words settle. Scout lay at their feet, sighing into the evening. The city below glowed with restless energy, but here, under the quiet sky, Michael felt the weight of a threshold crossed. The following days tested him. Without Juliet's glamour to shield him, every appearance was dissected. Paparazzi shouted questions from beyond the gates. Headlines speculated about the company's succession. At board meetings, colleagues studied him with thinly veiled doubt, yet through it all, Maya's steady presence kept him balanced. She managed the smallest details, the angle of a chair, the placement of his notes, the quiet encouragement whispered before a call began. One night, after a grueling session of therapy, Michael nearly collapsed from exhaustion. He cursed under his breath, furious at his body's limitations. Maya knelt beside him, her hands firm as she adjusted the braces. You think weakness defines you, she said quietly, but I see something else. What? His voice was ragged. Endurance, she answered. Endurance is strength too. For a long moment, they stayed there, her hand steadying his knee, his breath harsh in the silence. Something unspoken passed between them, as real as any vow. When she finally rose, she smoothed her apron and whispered, I'll bring lemon water. Michael watched her go, his chest tightening. He realized that crossing the threshold wasn't only about accepting the chair. It was about accepting what her presence meant, about facing the truth his father had told him to seek. That night, as he looked out over the glittering city, he thought of Juliet's laughter fading into distance and Maya's voice steady at his side. The contrast was clear, undeniable. The storm had passed. The real journey had begun. The days that followed took on a rhythm neither Michael nor Maya had expected. Life in the mansion had shifted into something quieter, more deliberate. A cadence shaped less by spectacle and more by survival. Michael, determined to live openly as though his paralysis were permanent, found that each day carried small humiliations buttons that slipped from his grasp, doors that resisted the chair, stares that reminded him of limits he refused to accept. But alongside the frustrations were small mercies, and most of them came from Maya. Each morning she appeared before sunrise, carrying the lemon water that had become their ritual. She had stopped bandaging her arm in front of him, though he still caught glimpses of the healing cut whenever her sleeve rode up. It reminded him of the night she had stepped between him and Juliet's rage, a memory that returned at the strangest times. She would set the glass down, humming softly under her breath, then go about adjusting his medication, arranging the day's appointments, and ensuring Scout's food and leash were ready. Michael began to notice her quiet instincts. When his hands shook trying to cut food, she slipped a fork with a modified grip onto his plate without comment. When his chair snagged on the thick rug in the hallway, she adjusted the edges so he wouldn't have to call for help. When fatigue made his voice sharp, she never flinched, never retaliated. Instead, she waited until his frustration passed, then resumed her work as though nothing had happened. One morning she suggested fresh air. You've been staring at those screens too long, she said, nodding toward the tablet filled with board memos. There's a trail at Griffith Park that's wheelchair accessible. Scout would like it. He hesitated, imagining paparazzi with long lenses hiding in the brush. but something in her steady gaze persuaded him. By mid-morning, they were outside, the city sprawling beneath them. The trail wound gently through oak and sycamore, sunlight dappling the pavement. Scout trotted ahead, tail high, ears twitching at every sound. Michael felt exposed at first, rolling along in the chair under the open sky, but Maya walked beside him without hurry. She pointed out wildflowers at the edge of the path, told him stories about childhood field trips, her voice weaving a tapestry of memory that softened the edges of his discomfort. When they passed an elderly couple with walking sticks, the man tipped his cap. The woman smiled warmly, and for a brief moment Michael felt less like a spectacle and more like a man simply moving through the world. Afterward, they stopped at a small diner on Los Feliz Boulevard. Maya ordered a vanilla milkshake and fries, insisting they split both. "It's a tradition," she explained. "When I was a kid, Fridays after school, my mom would buy one shake for all of us. We each got 2 sips, 3 if she was feeling generous." Michael laughed, the sound surprising him. He dipped a fry into the shake at her urging and shook his head. "That's barbaric. Try it before you judge." He did, grimaced, then laughed again. Still barbaric, but not terrible. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with tired eyes, refilled their water glasses and whispered as she leaned close, "You two make a good team." The words lingered with Michael long after they left. Back at the mansion, Maya settled him into the study while she unpacked groceries. He watched from the doorway as she moved through the kitchen with easy familiarity, humming again, Scout trailing her as though he were her shadow. It struck him that her presence had become the pulse of his home, her small kindnesses stitching each day into something bearable. That evening, as the sun lowered, a knock sounded at the door. It was the retired couple from down the hill, neighbors he barely knew. They carried a casserole dish wrapped in foil. "Thought you might need a break from fancy meals," the man said with a grin. "This one's old family recipe." Michael thanked them, surprised by the gesture. After they left, he and Maya shared the casserole at the kitchen island. It was simple, no truffle oil, no imported spices, just ground beef, noodles, and cheese baked until the edges crisped. But it tasted like comfort, like community. "Do you miss them?" Maya asked quietly. "Who?" "The days before all this, the way people used to look at you." Michael considered. "I thought I would, but maybe they didn't really see me at all. Maybe they only saw the fortune, the image." She nodded, her eyes downcast. "Sometimes people only look at what shines. They don't want to notice what's real." He studied her for a long moment, then said, "You notice." Her cheeks flushed. She busied herself with clearing plates, but he could tell his words had landed. The following day brought another test. As Michael maneuvered through the hallway, a tray of coffee cups slipped from his lap, shattering against the tile. He cursed under his breath, frustration boiling. Maya hurried in, kneeling to gather the shards. A piece sliced her palm, drawing blood. "Stop," he ordered. "You're hurt." She shook her head. "It's nothing. It's not nothing." His voice rose more sharply than he intended. "You can't keep bleeding for me." "Me?" She froze, then looked up, eyes dark with something unreadable. "I don't mind." The room went still. Michael swallowed hard, the weight of her words pressing into him. He wanted to ask what she meant, wanted to demand if she understood the danger of giving so much of herself. But he said nothing, because part of him feared the answer. That night, as he lay awake, the words replayed, "I don't mind." He thought of Juliet, who had minded everything, who had measured every inconvenience against her own gain, and he thought of Maya, who had given without measure, without demand. The difference carved itself deeper into his heart. The next morning, he found her in the garden, Scout at her side. She was tending to the lemon trees, her fingers brushing blossoms with care. He wheeled closer, the early sun warming his shoulders. "You were right," he said. She looked up. "About what?" "About small things, about how they matter." She tilted her head, waiting. "Last night, I realized, all the speeches, the galas, the board meetings, they mean nothing without the small things. Lemon water, fries dipped in milkshakes, neighbors bringing casseroles. Those are the things that tell you who you are. A slow smile spread across her face, and for the first time since his accident, he felt not just endurance, but something like hope. As the city hummed below them, Michael understood that the world would continue to judge him, to doubt him, to devour whatever narrative Juliet fed it. But here, in the rhythm of Maya's small kindnesses, he had found a truth greater than optics. And he knew he would need that truth in the battles still to come. The mansion at night had its own music, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the low click of security cameras, the whisper of wind pushing against glass doors. Michael had grown used to these sounds, though some nights they pressed on him more heavily than others. It was on one of these nights, long after Maya had gone to her small guest room, that something unexpected happened. He sat in the study, a mug of coffee cooling on the side table, his eyes wandering across spreadsheets glowing on the tablet. His body ached from therapy, his wrists sore from the resistance bands, yet his mind refused to rest. He reached for the mug, the edge slipping against his fingers. The liquid sloshed over the rim. On instinct, his body jolted not much, but enough that his legs shifted, muscles firing in ways he hadn't felt in weeks. The movement was small, barely more than a twitch, but it was undeniable. Scout reacted instantly. The service dog sprang up from his rug, ears pricked, tail stiff. He barked once, sharply, as though calling out a secret. Michael froze, the mug trembling in his grip. His heart pounded. He glanced down at his legs, half expecting the movement to continue. But they were still again, motionless as stone. The room seemed to hold its breath. A door opened softly down the hall. Footsteps approached, quick but careful. Maya appeared in the doorway, hair loose around her shoulders, a cardigan thrown over her nightclothes. "What happened?" she asked, her voice low, urgent. Michael hesitated. He could tell her nothing. He could brush it off, but Scout barked again, staring directly at his legs, then at Maya. Her gaze followed the dog's. She looked back at Michael, eyes narrowing slightly. "Did you move?" The question hung between them. He wanted to deny it, to insist she had imagined it. But something in her face stopped him. She wasn't prying, wasn't accusing. She was trying to protect him. Michael set the mug down carefully. It was nothing, just a slip. Maya stepped closer. She crouched beside the chair, her eyes steady. Was it nothing, or was it something you don't want anyone else to know? The truth pressed against his throat. He leaned back, exhaling. If word gets out that I might recover, everything changes. The board will spin it. The press will devour it. Juliet will use it to paint me as a liar. I can't risk it. Maya studied him silently for a long moment. Then she stood and walked to the corner where the small security camera blinked red. Without hesitation, she reached up, slid open the panel, and removed the memory card. She slipped it into her pocket. "Then no one saw a thing," she said simply. Michael stared at her. "You'd do that for me?" Her lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Protecting you isn't new, Mr. Johnson. You just didn't notice before." He swallowed, the weight of her words striking deeper than he expected. "Maya, why?" She looked away. "Because dignity matters. And because you matter." "Oh." Scout patted over, resting his head on her thigh as if in agreement. She stroked the dog absently, her eyes still avoiding his. Michael leaned forward, his voice softer now. "You realize you've made yourself part of this secret?" "I know," she said. "Secrets can be dangerous, but so can the truth when the world isn't ready for it." For the rest of the night, he couldn't focus on spreadsheets or headlines. His mind kept returning to the brief spark in his legs, the dog's reaction, and Maya's calm decision to erase the evidence. She had made a choice that could cost her everything if it ever came to light. Yet she hadn't hesitated. The following day, he watched her more closely. When she adjusted his lap blanket, when she guided him through stretches, when she scolded Scout gently for begging at the table, he saw the quiet firmness in her. She wasn't simply a caretaker. She had become his guardian, not of his body alone but of his dignity, his very story. That evening, as the sun set orange over the hills, Michael wheeled himself into the living room. Maya was setting out dinner, simple roast chicken with vegetables. He watched her move, graceful even in the most ordinary tasks. "You didn't ask me why I erased the footage," she said suddenly, without looking up. Michael blinked. "You already told me." "Number." She glanced at him then, her eyes steady. "I told you it was to protect you, but that wasn't the only reason." He waited. She placed the serving spoon down carefully. "Because I've seen people lose everything when the truth came out too soon. My brother, he got caught up in trouble years ago. He wasn't guilty, but he couldn't prove it fast enough. By the time the truth surfaced, the damage was done. I won't let that happen to you." Michael's chest tightened. He had never heard her speak of family before. "What happened to him?" Her lips pressed together. "He left. Started over somewhere far away. We don't talk much." She shook her head, as if to push away the memory. "But I learned then. Sometimes silence is the only shield we have." Michael's voice was low. "And now you're my shield." She didn't answer, but the way she carried herself said more than words. That night, lying awake again, he thought of Juliet's betrayal and Maya's sacrifice. Juliet had thrown glass at him without a second thought. Maya had stepped in its path. Juliet had twisted his weakness into a performance for sympathy. Maya had hidden his flicker of strength to preserve his choice. The difference was stark and undeniable. In the darkness, Scout shifted at the foot of the bed, ears flicking as if still remembering the night before. Michael reached down to scratch his head. "Good boy," he murmured. But he knew the real guard in this house wasn't the dog. It was the woman down the hall, who had decided his secret was worth keeping even if it cost her everything. The city outside pulsed with gossip and hunger, but inside, a fragile alliance had formed. For the first time since the accident, Michael realized he wasn't facing the battle alone. Juliet's mother lived in a penthouse off Wilshire, all glass walls and sharp corners. The place smelled faintly of orchids and expensive candles, and it was there that Juliet sought refuge after weeks of avoiding Michael's calls. She arrived with sunglasses pushed high on her head, her phone buzzing nonstop with notifications from social media. Her mother,